Well arrived everyone to Friday. According to some people, this might even be the beginning of the weekend. Now what we have for today is the last bit of our insight in 10.1.5 for the roles in this game. We looked at the melee DPS, the range DPS, the tanks, so all that's left now is the healers to look at. So what we're doing today is we're looking at the, however you want to call it, the tier list, the rankings, the meta, the power level of the specs right now, who is strong right now, and how likely are they to still be strong after 10.1.5, after the changes of 10.1.5. This is a particularly close subject to me, since I play healer, and I also have to decide what to play in 10.1.5 with an eye for Season 3, for the next patch, for the next content coming. So, looking at the situation at the moment for healers first. We can start at looking, for example, at the Mythic Plus. I took out all the rest of the roles, so you don't get confused and distracted. You just get to look at healers. What we're being told is that now Paladin, out of nowhere, or we can say out of something very specific, has now become the more relevant, the more powerful, and eventually the more popular of the specs for healers. Some of the healers that were popular before have remained there. So it's not that Holy Paladin went to the top and a bunch of other healers have been shuffled around. No, Holy Priest and Mistweaver are still at the bottom. Resto Druid, Resto Shaman, and Evoker are still quite high up in representation, just below Holy Paladin. This is also represented in the popularity of the specs. You can see here at all key levels, all representation is pretty healthy. As usual, one of my teachings is that if within 6 or 7 specs, so for tank and healers, your representation is above 10%, it means you're doing fine. It means you're healthy. So for healers, it's good, with the exception of course, the usual Mistweaver. Now, once you go into the competitive level, the max level for your gear, the plus 20, you do see once more all of these specs still relevant, and once more with the exception of Mistweaver. And as you can see, Holy Paladin isn't really very popular. It's the second, third, fourth, fifth most popular spec. So you're like, huh? This doesn't make much sense. Well, it makes sense once you go into the very high level of keys. Now, Holy Paladin is getting very close now to pass Resto Shaman. Even if you go and look at the actual record-breaking high keys, you see that the amount of Holy Paladins is quite high. It is definitely the more represented one, with a whole bunch of Evokers close by with Holy Paladin. So that seems to be the general situation at the moment for the specs. And this is the situation for Mythic Plus. For the raid, it's a little bit more interesting, because we have gotten this situation for a while now, with Preservation Evoker being the best performer, but when you look at the popularity, Preservation Evoker is nowhere near being at the most popular level. You can also see the evolution of the healers in the raid when you go and look at this very helpful tool in Warcraft logs, checking the entire tier worth of progression. And you can see that at the start, in the first week, in the first reset or so, it was Resto Shaman that was quite high, and Preservation Evoker that was quite low. Then as time went by, Preservation Evoker kept rising while Resto Shaman kept flopping down. Surprisingly, Holy Paladin hasn't really continued their growth like they did in Mythic Plus. They were going just fine up until a certain point, and then they have been going somewhat downhill. So the status quo in the raid at the moment looks like that Preservation Evoker and Resto Druid are the better performing ones. Now, still, you get told different things. The different things that you get told are that, for example, Holy Priest is the top performing. So clearly, who is becoming S tier, who is becoming very powerful, might not have to do with the HPS they provide, but something else. We have an entire video about what is being brought by Holy Priest in the raid and why they are S tier, besides their HPS, which is nothing special. So that's why, even though Resto Druid and Preservation Evoker are the better performers in terms of numbers, Holy Priest, jumps in and joins the gang as being the highest rated of healers in the raid. Now, on to our other question, or rather the question of the video, which is, okay, but what is changing in 10.1.5? We have our list of balance tuning. I shrank it down, I compressed it just to show the healer classes and healer specs. You can see that first in line, the changes to Resto Druid are quite minor, and they are going to help in a different thing other than healing. You can see that the changes to Resto Druid are the increase damage by 25% to all of their abilities. That's because Nature's Vigil is also going to be gutted by half in duration, as well as the cap of the AoE damage you can do with Nature's Vigil with your AoE abilities has also been reduced. So this is helping overall the damage of a Resto Druid in a Mythic Plus key, for example. This change will help the overall key pushers of Mythic Plus and will hurt the very high level key pushers in Mythic Plus, because in the very high level you want to concentrate the healer damage into burst windows, into necessary moments, whereas this type of buffing all of your damage by 25% will give you smoother damage throughout the key, but much lower burst, because your Nature's Vigil, which is your damage cooldown basically, has been nerfed. That's the major change happening to Druid, and it's mostly concentrated on damage, not really on healing. So if anything is going to change for Druid, it's very unlikely it's going to change in the raid, which is fine because they are doing fine. If anything, something will change in Mythic Plus due to their damage profile changing because of the changes to their base damage and to Nature's Vigil. After Druid, you have Evoker. So Evoker, we do have much bigger changes for augmentation, but as far as preservation goes, not too many things changes. There are some quality of life improvements for Evoker, especially in Mythic Plus, like Life Giver's Flame now healing 5 injured targets instead of a single one. This is the healing you do with Fire Breath. The very useful quality of life of using your Fire Breath on a big pack of enemies and then healing for the damage you do. Now it actually spreads into 5 players, so it actually becomes a legitimate AoE party heal now as an Evoker. You also have a few other increases. All spell and ability damage increase by 10%. We just looked at the average damage of an Evoker in Mythic Plus keys, and that is the lowest of the bunch together with Holy Priest. So definitely a warranted change. Then we have something we touched on before, the nerf to Rewind, with the compensation of making Exhilarating Burst stronger for more crit healing, giving more value to your crit if you take Exhilarating Burst, and then 2% more healing by default, 2% more healing flat. The last one is a, we can call tiny quality of life change, the introduction of 2 new talents, Potent Mana and Regenerative Magic in your General 3. One will give your Source of Magic ability, your Mana Regen ability, also 3% more healing and damage, which is not usable in Mythic Plus because you can only use it on a healer, and if you are the healer yourself, you can't use it on yourself. But what is actually pretty good is the 3% Leech talent. Either way, these are still quite minor changes. They're not really going to massively change the way the spec works. Now, the way the spec works is pretty good. If you were looking at Evoker for 10.1.5, most of these changes are positive for Evoker in 10.1.5, given that also it's already a pretty popular and strong spec. We do have more changes on a similar note to Mistweaver Monk. They too also get all spell and ability damage increased by 10%, but Ancient Teachings, their healing, their fist weaving healing has been nerfed from 150 to 135%, and Awakened Phelan has also been slightly nerfed. You do have something in your General 3, the addition of Yulon's Grace and Dance of the Wind added to the General 3 of Monk, which doesn't really change anything in particular for Mistweaver. So basically they are still in the same spot as they are now. The same spot that they are now is that despite doing quite decent HPS and competitive HPS in the raid, they are not really very considered. Look at the amount of players compared to the fifth one, the gap that there is between the 5th and the 6th healer. Very, very few Mistweaver monks. In Mythic Plus, it's actually even worse. It's actually even fewer than the raid comparison. Even if you go a little bit lower down to plus 20s, it is still very, very few. To put things in perspective, you are going to be finding a Mistweaver Monk in a Mythic Plus key at 20 or above in one key every 22 Mythic Plus keys that you do. That's how few times you will find yourself with a Mistweaver. So, given that they have few changes right now, it's very unlikely that anything positive will happen for Mistweaver in the near future. Therefore, I wouldn't really be recommending you to be playing Mistweaver anytime soon. After Mistweaver, we have, of course, the big question of today, which is Holy Paladin. Well, Holy Paladin is receiving a massive rework. We're actually gonna have, spoiler, a video tomorrow or in a couple of days talking about the further changes happening to this rework, because they are continuing to come in, and further, spoiler, those are not positive, by the way. There is a lot to complain about. Anyways, the point is that just because there is this massive rework, you owe it to yourself to at the very least go and try Holy Paladin. Especially if you weren't used to playing Holy Paladin before, or even more, if you were tired of playing Holy Paladin because you didn't, recognize yourself in the way this version of Holy Paladin is playing. There are plenty of question marks right now on the PTR, some whispers and words about maybe even playing more of a caster heavy build because of the recent changes happening in the PTR. You still have plenty more things, like even if you continue to play the melee build, you will be playing way more Holy Shocks than before. Your Hammer of Wrath might have more value than before. You will be playing more around Infusion of Light regardless. You now have a bunch more cooldowns that are worth taking compared to before. So there are plenty of things changing for Holy Paladin. Now, Holy Paladin is middle of the pack roughly in the raid because they are super high up in priority, because you do want Holy Paladins for the auras, for the Devotion aura, the aura mastery in the raid, so your popularity will always be high, while simultaneously not very high up when it comes to the actual HPS and the actual performance. In Mythic Plus, we have just looked at what's been going on in the very high keys, the growth of Holy Paladin, partially because now Vengeance is the meta tank, so you still want a combat res, partially because this big rework is coming. So for Holy Paladin, it will be my generally recommended take as to trying a new healer in 10.1.5, much like I said for the ranged DPS, for example, to try out Mage or to try out Warlocks, because they are receiving a whole bunch of changes that might spice things up for the spec. And in the case of Paladin, in the case of Holy Paladin, it's a pretty big thing coming to spice things up. So it's a pretty recommended spec to try out in the upcoming patch. After Paladin, we have Priest. So Priest is receiving a few of the changes we have talked about also recently for their damage. With Holy Priest, for example, they are receiving buffs once more. All ability damage increased by 10%. You also have more hotfixes that just buffed Holy Priest a few days ago for more single target damage as well. The same treatment, by the way, was given to Discipline. All spell and ability damage increased by 10%, with a slight nerf to Atonement, but in return you gained the new Choice Node talent with Barrier. So now you can take Luminous Barrier and be much more effective in Mythic Plus groups, in particular with your Panic, Absorb, big cooldown. These are very small changes for both Discipline and Holy Priest. For the amount of problems both had, this is like nothing, right? This is like very, very little. The problem for Holy Priest is that they are still basically unviable in Mythic Plus due to how very little damage they do, and even the positive point of, actually, if you think about it, Priest kind of brings a lot of utility in Mythic Plus. Why don't we start bringing in some Holy Priests? Never mind, Shadow Priest is super meta, we don't need to bring in a Holy Priest. So that's kind of the issue with both Discipline and Holy. Not really many changes. And if you're looking into playing them in the near future, in the next patch, it's still fine for Holy Priest. They are still gonna be very, very wanted in the raid by most guilds. Even the guilds who don't realize why the top guilds bring a Holy Priest, they will still just bring a Holy Priest just because. So you will get the value in playing a Holy Priest. Not nearly as much in playing Discipline though. So with such few changes happening to Discipline, then I still don't think there is going to be much of anything changing in 10.1.5 or in the near future when it comes to priests. The last in line is Resto Shaman. So Resto Shaman is receiving a nerf, just like all of the Shamans, the big, reworks kind of Ancestral Guidance. Now Blizzard seems to have set for the Ancestral Guidance was nerfed to only heal with single target abilities, then was reverted to still heal with AoE abilities, but only at a maximum of 20% of your maximum health per tick, up to 3 targets, and then also made it not work with anything that's not from your class. So trinkets, weapon engines, potions, etc, etc. So that's already somewhat weaker, but not that groundbreaking for Resto Shaman. The actual changes to Shaman itself are few. All spell and ability damage increased by 10% once more for the healers. This is all for the compensation of the amulet being nerfed. And then all healing increased by 3%. This is one of the more recent changes. This is not gonna change too much. Resto Shaman had been dropping down as we saw from the evolution throughout the tier of healers, from when it was rather high up to lower down, and of course giving them a 3% healing increase is not really gonna change this. They have received a hotfix recently, buffing their tier set to be stronger. That still keeps their tier set as by far the weakest out of the healers. So with this change in 10.1.5, this minor change in 10.1.5, not much should be changing for Resto. They have still lost a lot of value in the raid, but because of how strong or how perceived as strong they were from the end of Vault of the Incarnates, they still have a pretty healthy player base in the raid. Same goes for Mythic Plus, because they grew to be very, very strong at the end of the last season, especially with their damage. They remained very popular. Now they are about to be overtaken by Holy Paladins. Maybe Resto Druid will continue to grow, but it still looks like either way Resto Shaman will be popular enough in Mythic Plus. So yes, you can still jump on Resto Shaman in 10.1.5, but just know that the popularity they have at the moment is downhill. So yes, it's still fine to play Resto Shaman, but don't expect them to continue to rise or continue to maintain their powerful level that you thought they were going to have up until a few weeks ago. That's for sure for Resto Shaman. So this is all we have for today in terms of the healer situation when it comes to the changes coming in 10.1.5. 10% damage across the board because of the amulet, a few extra damage increases to a few of the healers, the rework going the way of Holy Paladin, some of the changes going the way of Resto Druid and Preservation Evoker as well. These are the more relevant things happening to healers in just at this point like 10 days before the release of 10.1.5. So that is what was worth recapping for today when it came to healers. Thanks, of course, as usual, to all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help. You can still support completely for free. You can like and comment down below to cheat the YouTube algorithm. You can also then support by subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, why did it get to be so long of a video?